I mean, look at this picture. This is the Enneagram 5. Okay, yo, what's good, you guys? So today we'll be reacting to the LocalScriptMan Enneagram 5 video. Now, many people came up to me with this guy's channel asking if his information is good, if they should follow it. So we will have a little breakdown of that. The overview of his channel is pretty simple. He's not really a typologist guy. He's more so a guy who's into filmmaking. He writes characters, probably stuff like that, and he utilizes Enneagram to help him write characters, which is pretty smart, you know, it's a good thing. His editing is very good, it's very engaging, so he has it all down, right? Editing is superb. Now, but is the information correct? Because we're geeks, okay? And typology is our territory.
Most descriptions of the Enneagram 5 fixation highlights introvertedness, intellectualism, and special interests. But the Enneagram isn't about what a person does, it's about why. So why are...
It's correct, but it's misused so much by the community. Because they say, well, it's not about the behavior, it's not about anything like that, it's about my why. And, you know, that's not really how this works. Because many people can be afraid of vulnerability. Many people want to be invulnerable. Many people want to be intelligent and be seen as intelligent. Many people want to be competent. So just because they have this motivation to want to be something, does that make them that type? Of course not. In fact, behavior, right, is a big component of a type. Because if you have a certain motivation, it will certainly show in your behavioral patterns. But the truth is, with Enneagram, you have stuff like motivations, yes, but that's simplistic. You have defense mechanisms, which are even more important. You have fixations, you have the cognitive drive, the psychological drive, the emotional world of the type, everything. Enneagram 5 is defined. Okay, it is defined by introversion.
Are 5s introverted, intellectual, and prone to special interests? Well, the 5
special interests, risky business, again. There's, yeah, you know, okay.
Fixation is a fear response. The world is a big, scary place.
Makes sense, it's a head type.
Type 6 will manage that fear by looking outward, but a type 5 will manage that fear by looking inward. 5s need to feel personally competent. It's not about where is the safe place. It's about...
And this is where it gets risky, because he's not incorrect, really, you know? The 6 looks outwards, sure, it's more external, but the 5 withdraws into his own world, withdraws into his own mind. Is it that being competent is the number one thing? No. Because the truth is, listen, if we looked at the type and be like, oh, his whole purpose is being competent, you're not looking at the Enneagram 5, you're looking at an Enneagram 3, and you're looking at a specific subtype of the Enneagram 3 called the Self-Preservation 3. Everything the Self-Preservation 3 does is to be competent.
About how can I make myself a safe place? The stereotypical 5 accomplishes this through intellectualizing. Basically, these 5s will have a theory of everything. During their lives, they've built up an understanding of how the world works. They've built up a personal philosophy of what is.
True, but also risky business. Because Enneagram 6 wants to understand the world and are extremely intellectual, like the social 6. This is a social 6 can watch this video and start thinking they're Enneagram 5, right? So the truth is, the Enneagram 5 isn't as much about intellectualism as it is about detachment from the external world. And as he says, going inside of their mind, but not necessarily being a fucking master geek.
5s think they know how the world works. They can plug everything neatly into their philosophy. Everything has to make sense, because if it doesn't, then suddenly the world is scary again. So one of the most common...
I'm getting a bit of a social 6 vibe. You know, the social 6 wants to gain certainty of the world to overcome its fears by intellectualizing and by things making logical sense, being consistent. So okay.
5 stories is about the 5 facing a great mystery, something unexplainable or inherently chaotic, perhaps even divine or supernatural.
I don't even know him. I am having all of these fantasies about some man I have never even met who lives in Seattle.
And positive growth.
Okay, so just looking at her, very skeptical. She's even Enneagram 5.
Growth for a 5 is accepting that it's okay to not know. It's accepting that this thing is beyond me, such as the revelation of Cohle at the end of True Detective. After clinging to his nihilistic philosophy for the entire show, he finally opens his heart to hope. Good old irrational hope. Negative growth, by contrast, can be when a knowledge seeker flies to...
So Cohle, he used Cohle as an example. I don't blame him. I really don't, because he could have used many other examples that are much worse. But Cohle isn't a bad example to portray what he's trying to make, the point he's trying to make. But is Cohle Enneagram 5? So one of the biggest traits he lacks is docility and sensitivity. Rust is actually a very proactive guy. I mean, this guy has no issue in using force, intimidation to get his way. I mean, we've seen this, right? And not only that, he worked undercover. Okay, undercover, deep undercover in situations where you have to be quick thinking, you have to be extremely adaptive to survive, using violence and shit like that. So what are you gonna type him? You know, an SP5, the most passive 5. I mean, how does he navigate his situations as a detective? We see there's a scene where he tries to get information from some people, beats the fucking shit out of them. As of right now, I wouldn't say he's a great example of Enneagram 5, and he probably even isn't Enneagram 5.
Too close to the sun. They have to know. They have to make sense of it all, even if there's no sense to be made.
Why is Indiana Jones Enneagram 5? Is this guy very detached from the external world? Does he live in his own world? Right? Because that's not my impression of Indiana Jones. My impression of Indiana Jones is someone who's extremely proactive in the external world. He always takes charge in that sense. He is in the external world and he wants to pursue the things he wants, his desires. Which, by the way, we know for Enneagram 5 that's very difficult. The growth of an Enneagram 5 is to start being in touch with the external world. This is not something that's supposed to be easy. It's supposed to be the growth point. So when you see someone who's living in the moment and living in the external world so easily and asserts his own desires, you're not dealing with an Enneagram 5.
To know. I want to know.
I need to know why. What did we do wrong? Why do you hate us?
But this
Now, I don't know if he's using this screaming woman as an example of Enneagram 5, but we know Enneagram 5 is certainly not going to be this overly hyper-emotional, explosive character. Their pathology is being schizoid personality, right? So this is not someone who's going to be so expressive with his emotions. It's someone who's going to be who might have flat affect.
This is what people neglect about 5s. That intellectual stereotype is one of many ways the 5 complex can manifest in a person.
Why do you think people mistype as Enneagram 5? Because of this. I mean, isn't Social 7 even more intellectual? It is. What about 6? It is. It's the intellectualism. Intellectualism is nice shit. Many types can have that. But what types are so introverted and withdrawn to the point of such hyper passivity and docility and detachment from the external world? That's what you should pay attention to.
This whole deal is about becoming personally competent to manage the big scary outside world. Just as common as the intellectual 5 is the gym bro 5, the I studied the blade looking ass 5.
There's no such thing as a gym bro 5. And when I'm saying there's no such thing as a gym bro 5, that doesn't mean Enneagram 5 cannot go to the gym. They can. But they will never be a gym bro.
I've talked a lot about Hot D in this series, partially because I want the clicks, but also because I love some of the depth these characters were given. I've seen some people a bit upset that Aemond Targaryen, Fire and Blood's ultimate evil badass, was written as having insecurities, but I think the 5 complex really suits him. Aemond is obsessed with his own competence.
So he's relying on the competency types, right? Like the 1, the 3, the 5. And he seems to think that competency is what defines the type. It doesn't. Once again, and everything that I just said until now, do you believe this fits Aemond, who was known as being very power hungry, right? Who has no issues in knowing his desires. I mean, this guy, in fact, imposes his desires on the world around him. He wants the throne, and he's gonna do anything to get it, to be in power. He has no issues in intimidation. He has no issues in being concrete and grounded in the moment. He has no issues in fighting in that kind of way. But this is not someone who struggles being in touch. He's not even an introverted guy. Just because he's silent and smart doesn't make him truly introverted, at least in the sense of his cognition. Which subtype would this Aemond Targaryen really be? Would he be SP5, which is, by the way, the most docile, the most passive, literally, like a fucking fly? Or is it the social 5, the totem of knowledge? He wants to be the beacon of knowledge. Clearly fucking not. Sexual 5? That doesn't make sense either. I agreed with him a lot on how he describes the type. Then the application comes. It falls flat, right? Probably because he goes by the superficial traits, which is funny because to him and many others, well, he's not going by behavior, so it's not superficial. He's going by motivations. No, This is a superficial trait. He wants to be competent. He's Enneagram 5. He lacks all the core qualities of the Enneagram 5.
Don't confuse 5s with 3s. 3s want people to know they're competent. 5s just want to be competent because deep down,
SP3 can be a type where they genuinely believe they don't have vanity. Okay, is their passion. This is not something that they might see in themselves, because like, I just want to be competent for my own sake. So in some sense, he's even describing the SP3.
they're scared shitless and overwhelmed by the world around them, and competence is how they cope.
I mean, this is an Enneagram 5 who's about to gonna butcher this young kid.
This isn't to say they don't have an ego around that competence. Walter White doesn't accept help with his cancer treatment because he needs to feel personally able to handle things on his own.
Walter White is not an Enneagram 5 once again for the same reasons I was saying. And the reason why he doesn't accept it is because, yes, he is an extremely ego-driven, extremely image-driven person who is very egoistical. And that's kind of why he doesn't want to do it. His pride, his ego is being wounded. That's why he wants to refuse it. But this is not an Enneagram 5. I mean, Walter White is someone who PTSD'd Jesse. This is someone who is gonna do that kind of thing. He's very power hungry, and he's much more proactive than in the 5 core. He doesn't actually have an issue of being like, well, I need to be in touch with the external world more. He does just fine in the external world, guys. He built an empire. Okay, he built an empire. And it's kind of funny because many of my friends type Walter White as self-preservation 3. Right? Which kind of is funny, as you can see all the focus of this guy on competency. You kind of see the pattern here.
Aemond is constantly thinking about how good of a fighter he is. The competence of 5s has this.
Aemond was a head type. He would be a sexual 6. Okay, for sure. Or he might be even SP8, okay, because that makes more sense than 5.
Remember, we develop insecurities around things we didn't have in abundance. The bullied kid who felt weak, incompetent, and alone is going to turn himself into a singular, self-sufficient killing machine.
This is the first. I mean, look at this picture. This is the Enneagram 5, okay? Someone who felt weak and powerless, who grows up and turns himself in a self-sufficient killing machine. What could that be? Would that be the 5 or would that be the 8? It more likely sound like the 8.
And when 5s are in their element and they've put in all the legwork and they got this, they can become extremely brash and overconfident.
This is a good example, a much better one than all of those others. This is an actual Enneagram 5 that he's using here. And guys, listen, Beth really captures all the just traits I just talked about. Introverted, detached. You see detachment. She's extremely detached and extremely cold. See the flat affect in her emotionality? That's the Enneagram 5.
Some of the wealthiest people I know are 5s. They like to see that number tick up. It's not that they want to control you or they want you to like them. It's a subconscious security blanket. So we often see different types of hoarding with 5s. Hoarding money, hoarding skill, hoarding knowledge. Bill from The Last of Us is another common 5 archetype, the Doomsday Prepper 5. You can see his ego when he finally gets to execute his apocalypse plans. He loves it. He loves how competent he is. But Bill's
again, competent. Competent. And Bill prepares for this, and he's so great. I'm very skeptical Bill is even a 5. He probably is an SP9. Okay? Because, I mean, what is 5 about him? Is it because he lives alone? Is it because he lives alone and he's a preppy guy? Like, what's 5 about him?
Actual arc encapsulates a different side of 5-ness, the 5 love story. Deep down, 5s are overwhelmed by the universe, and that tends to include a fear of emotional engulfment.
True. And that's what Elizabeth Harmon shows. And some other examples he's showing here don't. So I'm confused. He's saying the right things, but he's misapplying them.
Emotions are chaos. Emotions don't make sense. I'm freaking out. What is this? I need to go back to my basement immediately. So that unexplainable divine that 5s have to reckon with, it doesn't have to be a literal mystery or something supernatural. It can be love. The 5 love story is about allowing themselves to have that warmth, even though it terrifies them. You can see why 5s like Bill often get paired up with 2s like Frank. 2s
not even sure Frank is a 2, but okay. Probably fucking social 9.
Are overloving while 5s are emotionally stingy.
You live in this safe little world where no one challenges you, and you're scared shitless to do anything else because
Don't
that
tell
might
me
mean that
about
you
my
have to
world. Don't
change.
tell me about my world.
Avoidant attachment slots nicely into the 5 complex. That's the whole story of Goodwill Hunting. He's become this snarky intellectual to compensate for the fact that he's utterly terrified of connection.
He is not an Enneagram 5. See, there's more issues in the video. He would be a sexual 6 before all of that. First of all, why would we look at someone like Will and think, guy who struggles with the external world, he hides in his internal world? I mean, we're talking about a guy, right, who beats people up like it's an average day in his life, right? And a guy who, when we see his friend being embarrassed in public, he's the guy who asserts himself in this situation and puts this kind of wannabe into his place. Even suggesting that they should step outside and handle the business like men. How he's reacting when she's trying to press him, when he feels this fear of abandonment, it would be much more likely for the sexual 6 to appear this way than the 5 core, right? It just doesn't make sense. The 5 is not going to be this reactive, aggressive, explosive person. He's a very reactive guy. And again, he once again lacks all of the core attributes of the Enneagram 5, regardless if he wants the knowledge, he's smart, doesn't really matter. He lacks the core qualities.
And in order to grow, he has to take the leap of faith and give intimacy a chance. The clip I played earlier is from this movie called Sleepless in Seattle. It's about a guy whose wife dies, and then he talks about it on a radio show, and this lady hears it, and the entire movie is about them trying to find each other, and they do at the very end, and they only have one scene together at the end. Tom Hanks in this movie is just a regular type, nice, wholesome dude guy, but Meg Ryan's character is way more interesting. She has this whole cynical philosophy around love, yet she inexplicably feels drawn to this man. So she spends the whole movie rationalizing and
I'm not seeing it so far.
And trying to stay on top of the situation, but
she's open as a bird.
Of course, her final choice is a leap of faith. She abandons all reason and goes to be with Dude Guy. Another thing, I haven't talked about static characters in this series much because I wanted to emphasize that typing only makes sense when you can identify deep internal problems. Otherwise, it's just a BuzzFeed quiz, right? Enneagram is not about identifying a character's vibe, it's about identifying...
Oh my god, we know.
Okay,
Stop saying it.
All right, you get it. That said, though, I will make an exception for 5s because a lot of the time they're low-key begging to be supporting characters. 5s tend to drift to the fringes of society. They often play the role of the wizard who lives on the edge of town and has all the sacred knowledge.
He's talking probably about the social 5 here, right? I'm guessing. The totem of knowledge. Yeah, I mean... And it's not incorrect, but that's what confuses me, because he paints this image of this wizard, and of course it doesn't have to be literal, but he still paints this image, and then he proceeds to type someone like Walter White as a 5, or Aemond, right? That's what kind of fucks.
Philip Seymour Hoffman in Almost Famous comes to mind. Just this guy who stays in his lane and organizes the world around his big philosophical opinions.
Music. Yeah, true music.
Philosophy itself is very 5-coded. What's the theory of everything? What's the worldview that ties this chaotic mess together? Probably my favorite 5 story ever is Altered States. It's about a scientist who's on a quest to find the root of all human nature, the great answer to everything that will give him the peace he needs. He destroys his life in the pursuit of this answer. He pushes his mind and body to the brink of annihilation only to realize there is no answer. And what he needed all along was to accept the chaos, which is again placed on the same side of the arc as reuniting with the love of his life.
It's interesting. This kind of reminds me, I'm not sure if I'm tripping. You guys can tell me if I'm tripping. It reminds me a bit of Victor from Arcane.
It's been suggested that the 5 complex is another way of saying autism. People hear this and
yeah, well, I didn't say that. You said that. But yeah, I mean, he's not correct. I mean, he's not really wrong.
Go, no, stop. We're not doing that because autism spectrum disorder is a recognized clinical phenomenon and the Enneagram isn't. While I do understand this, it's important to remember that official psychological classifications are also made up. They're labels we've applied to better communicate and sort people according to their needs. Like there isn't a box in your brain labeled autism that's either checked or unchecked. It's a broad umbrella pertaining to a cluster of traits and thought patterns. I know 5s who are autistic. I also know autistic people who aren't 5s, and I know 5s who aren't autistic. But when you hear 5s are people who come into the world and fundamentally feel afraid of or at odds with it, so they become hyper competent or knowledgeable in one area to stave off their anxiety and fear of engulfment, often developing a theory of everything that they stubbornly cling to because they need to file everything neatly in their minds to be
A bit more of a 6 here.
at peace. It's okay to be like, oh yeah, that sounds pretty autism coded. Anyways, another 5 story is that of J. Robert Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer
Never watched it. I should watch it. But some people say he's
explores what it looks like when a person who lives in their head suddenly realizes, oh shit, this is real.
Yeah, I mean, see, okay, so with this guy, he sees it. Okay.
The emotions really creep up on 5s. They neglect that emotional side of themselves because it doesn't fit the theory, but all they're doing is repressing it, and eventually it's going to come out. So a lot of times, moments of weakness for 5s will be emotional in nature because that side of them is insecure and underdeveloped. They don't know how to handle it. Even when 5s do open up, it's usually to one trusted person. I think this is why 5 love stories work as well as they do. There's a scarcity to their love, so it makes it hit harder. In terms of personality, again, super general, 5s tend to be socially awkward. They'll ramble and ramble without much thought as to how they're being perceived. They know the truth, and they are going to tell you, even if that means boring you to death. Of course, it goes without saying that they don't actually have to know the truth by default. You could have a 5 whose philosophy is absolute dog shit. The point of the 5's rigid worldview is that it makes them feel comfortable. A lot of the time, 5s can be really unkempt. They tend to neglect their bodies since they spend so much time in their heads. But they might also have some weird sense of style that highlights their esoteric prophet status. The 5 will just have the worst haircut, or an absolutely bonkers face tat or wardrobe, or a sapphire where their eye used to be, and it's just this immutable part of their identity. But yeah, 5 stories: competence, truth-seeking, independence, existential dread, leaps of faith.
I mean, do you see how many mistypes can you get? Competency, SP3. Independence, many types can be, but SP8, SP9.
If you saw the 6 video, you know that these are very similar to some of the 6 themes. Indeed, the two blur together sometimes, and I've drawn the line in my own way that some of you might disagree with. A lot of you might be inclined to gatekeep the 5 as only the intellectual types, which is fine, it's all made up anyway. But for me, internal security versus external security seemed like the best way to divvy it up.
It's kind of funny because what he says isn't really wrong entirely, right? Like, we can agree with a lot of what he says, but then there's certain things that he says that just completely off the fucking rocker. And it all starts to kind of get worse when he tries to apply it to characters and people. Most of those examples that he has shown us, they're mistyped and they're not even close to a 5 core. It's a weird dissonance between him describing the theory in a way that kind of makes sense with some slip-ups, like the focus on this competency. So there's and also lacking a lot of the other attributes that are more important. It's not the worst, but us being geeks, we're extremely pedantic and we want to make sure that the information is correct. I'm an Enneagram 5 because I seek knowledge and I want to be correct, and I'm a truth seeker. Anyway, that's it from me for today. Tell me guys in the comment section what you guys think about his Enneagram 5 video. What do you agree with? What do you disagree with? Have a little discussion going. Again, don't butcher him like a pig. I'm out. I'm Chowers and I'm bouncing.